So if you have a disrupted microbiome, it can cause leaky gut, holes in your intestinal permeability lining. And then once those that leakiness is there, things get through that shouldn't get through. And then you spark this autoimmunity or this molecular mimicry that develops into autoimmune. So it's this kind of nice little triangle, and you got to address each of those 3 points of the triangle to get people well. And for it to settle down, it can take quite a while. So like one little piece of gluten, one crouton-sized piece of gluten can trigger off a response to someone who's a celiac or gluten sensitive for up to 4 or 5 days. So if somebody cheats once a week, then they're putting themselves in a bad way for weeks at a time. Okay, so I'll stop screen share. Any questions about that, Joanne?
So if they find through testing and all that there's this permeability and that, that might be something, there's hope for that though. There's strategies to, combat and try to heal that.
Sure. So even for the most severe celiac, and that's an IgG mediated reaction, that's a true full blown, and people can go into anaphylaxis with taking in gluten. Those people can be healed. Certainly avoidance. Number 1, 2, and 3 things is avoidance, avoidance, avoidance. So you got to be on 100% gluten-free diet. I don't know if I shared with you the patient. It wasn't my patient, but this was a patient. It's a very interesting story. She was a nun, and she lived in a convent, and she was a celiac. This was before celiac was like on everyone's mind, because this was like 20 years ago. And she saw, this was up in New York State, so she lived in a convent with other nurses. And she kind of did the bookkeeping, and because all these women lived together, they were able to cook and keep the house fully free of gluten. So she would go see her gastroenterologist, and she kept having this persistent bleeding, internal bleeding. And it was blood coming out in her stool, and they're like, Mom, gosh, are you sure you're not eating gluten? She said, well, I live in a convent with my other sisters, and they all look out for me, and we all cook gluten-free foods. They don't bring anything from the grocery store that has gluten in it. She says, I swear I'm adherent, I'm compliant. And time and again, she'd come back and she kept having blood in her stool. They couldn't figure it out. And then it dawned on them. They go to mass every morning, and the priest would come over to the convent, say mass, and they would give out the Eucharist, which was wheat. So even that little bit of wheat and that little Eucharist wafer that she had was enough of a daily dose to cause her celiac to flare up. So once that was realized, they were like, okay, you can't have wheat host anymore. They had to go to the bishop, and then the bishop actually went to the Vatican at the time it was Pope John Paul II, had to give special permission for them to create a corn-based wafer for this particular nun. Anyway, so they granted her permission, and once she transitioned from the wheat wafer to the corn-based, her bleeding stopped.
Wow.
So the moral of that story is that even a tiny amount of gluten can spark a reaction you don't want. Now, most people in the world don't have celiac. They have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So they're sensitive, which is an IgG mediated reaction, or IgG, IgA mediated, not IgE. So the reactions aren't as bad, but they can still cause problems and keep you in a perpetual state of inflammation. Like, how many people do you know who try everything they can to lose weight and they can't lose weight? They go to the gym, they're there for 2 hours, flop sweat, on the elliptical machine going crazy. They eat like a bird. They only eat 1 salad a day, and they can't lose weight. That's because they're perpetually inflamed. And I tell my patients, we got to get the inflammation under control before you're ever able to lose weight. It's like a major roadblock. So if they're going out and they give up the bread, but they have beer, which has gluten in it, and they drink a beer a week, then they're going to be in this perpetual state of inflammation, and they won't lose weight, and they won't get their Hashimoto's or their MS or their lupus under control. So, you have to be 100% in compliance with the treatment plan.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and just super, super helpful information, and just some things going, once we realize what's actually going on, that there are, evasive, a little more natural things like just eliminating certain foods, adding certain beneficial foods,
Mhm.
supplements, just some things like that that we can do that are a little more natural approach that gets more to the bottom of what's going on. So,
Sure.
so thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay, sure thing.
Again.